Hey everybody, welcome to Wish You Had Dad. This is probably the most important video I think I've ever done because it's about something nobody wants to talk about, but you really have got to think about, or you're going to make some pretty horrendous mistakes, which is what me and my family did when my father got sick 3 years ago. So please watch this, even if your parents are in great health, because the time to watch this is not when they're not in great health, but it's right now. If you know somebody that needs to watch this, please share it with them. This is important information that hopefully can save you. So I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about what to do when your parents are healthy, before they maybe get sick. I'm going to talk about what to do when they get sick. Because as you'll see when I tell my story, there's some pretty horrendous things that can happen. First thing is you need to talk to your parents right now about what's going on with their health. If they're in good health, that's great, but you need to understand before they get sick, things like, do you have a will? Do you have a trust? How are things set up? What accounts do you have? What assets do you have? Nobody wants to talk about dying, but if they get cringy talking about this stuff, show them this video because it is important. The reason it's so important to know where this stuff is, especially, and again, look, there's a lot of great second marriages, a lot of great third marriages, but if there are step parents or step siblings involved, things can get really nasty very, very quickly. Here's my story. So my father, about 3.5 years ago, he had back pain, really bad back pain. My dad lives in a very small town in North Florida. Came down with some serious back pain, and his doctor, who was out of town, just prescribed him with some heavy-duty painkillers. Well, heavy-duty painkillers do cause constipation in people. I know that's something else you don't want to talk about, but they do. So my father wound up sitting in his chair taking these pills for about a week and got impacted bowels. Well, they took him to the hospital, the regional center close to where he lived in another small town in rural North Florida. And they had him in there and they said, okay, here's what we're going to do because your bowels are impacted, you're miserable, we're going to give you a CAT scan. So they took him into the CAT scan room, and sometime when he was in there, they dropped him on his head. They dropped him off the gurney, dropped him on his head, and he had a major stroke. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you guys are probably thinking right now, wow, that's a major lawsuit. Well, no, because hospitals can write up things however they want, and this particular hospital said that him being dropped on his head had nothing to do with the major stroke, even though he's never had a stroke. So anyway, now my father goes to being completely pretty much incapacitated very, very quickly. My father was a trial attorney for his entire life. He was a judge. My dad had drafted his own trust documents. He knew exactly how he wanted things to play out. Things we did not know before, though, because we never bothered to ask. Do you have a health directive? We did not know who had power of attorney over his health situation. We never bothered to ask. Once this started and once we went down this road, unfortunately, his wife, who had been his wife for a long time, went down a different road. Because here's the issue. When your parents get sick, you as the children are going to be concerned about one thing, which is getting them better. So let's talk about that first. If your parents get sick and they go to the hospital if you live in a small town somewhere and your parents go to the hospital, get them to medical help in a large metropolitan area as quickly as you can. This is going to raise their chance of survival greatly. Because if you think about it, it just makes sense. Great doctors don't live in podunk towns. The problem with doctors is all doctors, regardless of how much skill they have, regardless of how much experience they all have a God complex. If you're a doctor and you're watching this, I'm sorry, you do. It's just one of those things. So the smaller town doctor with a God complex is a recipe for disaster. So the first bit of advice is get your parent to a major place as quickly as you can. In my story, unbeknownst to us, without any decision-making from our family, our stepmother decided to move our father to the rinkiest, dinkest place you can find in an even smaller town to take care of him. And her goal was to get him back to their even smaller town, at which point, literally within a couple of months of this happening, his doctor telling us, that's it, he's dead. I mean, this is the end of it. He's not going to get better. Well, then in the middle of the night, he was moved to a rehab facility in the middle of nowhere where these people were just literally I don't know what they were doing. But if your parents go into a rehab facility, you got to check on them. You've got to be there. So number one, challenge if it's a small town doctor, challenge those opinions. Force them. Go for a second opinion. Don't just take what a doctor says as gospel. Get a second opinion. Next thing, if they go to a rehab facility, I don't really care where that is. You've got to check on your loved one? Because, very simply, my father, once he got moved to this podunk rehab facility, he wound up with a massive bed sore because they weren't moving him around enough. That's really what started the end of my father's life, was this bed sore started to kill him. Again, because we never saw a healthcare directive that was done. One was produced by my stepmother at some point. And the unfortunate thing about that healthcare directive, because we never discussed it with my father, the validity of it was really in question. We didn't really think it was valid. However, this form had been notarized by a local attorney in his small podunk town. And later on, we found out from the person that actually notarized it that she was basically threatened with her job to notarize it after the fact. That's tragic. And it happens in small towns a lot. And it depends on friends and friends of friends, and bad things can happen. And that's kind of what we were dealing with. So that's, again, why it's so important to find out what their wishes are before they get sick. Because once your parent, if they have a brain injury, they're not the same person. They're never going to be the same person again. So understanding their wishes and what they want when they're healthy is so incredibly important. So now we got my father who's brain injured. He's got, at this point, he has a trach. He's now got a bad bed sore. And while we were doing nothing as his children, by focused on getting him better, getting him to better rehab facilities, getting that trach out, getting him back to eating. Because if you have an elderly parent, they have that trach. They got to get to where they can get him back on food. That's the key. We're trying to get him through rehab. So we are all just hyper-focused on nothing but my dad's health. Now, during this time, unfortunately, the step side of that family was not focused on his health. They were focused on money. Now, keep in mind, I do pretty well. That's why you're hopefully listening for me. My siblings do well. This is not about money. We didn't need the money. But for my step family, it was. They went in and started taking all of my dad's tools, started taking his tractor. These mysterious bill of sales would come up. I mean, they started taking all of this really heavy, expensive equipment out of the house. So another piece of advice. When your loved one goes into the hospital or goes in there, somebody in your family has got to be designated as the person to take an inventory of all of their stuff. Clutch, you've got to do this. Act as though they're coming home, but make sure somebody inventories everything, and everybody knows they've got an inventory, because that is going to reduce the idea that it's going to walk away. Now, back to the story. So my father had lived in a very large house on a very large piece of land, kind of outside of town. It was held in the trust, and again, very specific. My dad set this trust up. It was very specific. It was going to take care of my stepmother for the rest of her life. Everything was fine. We made assumptions during this time that, again, everybody was just looking out for my father, when in reality they weren't. Money was being moved, assets were being sold, a motorhome got sold, his business office got sold, his house got sold, and a new house was purchased. Now, all of these assets were in trust. They were in the name of the trust. So we assumed that they would just be going into the trust. They didn't. They got funneled outside of it because none of us were watching the money. So again, here's another bit of advice. If there are any financial transactions at all that happened during this time, it is imperative that a third party, preferably an attorney, look at this. Because again, you are not going to be focused on this. You are rightfully so going to be focused on just trying to get your parent healthy. But a bad actor can very easily swoop in at this time and cause chaos to whatever's happening. You're talking about a building, a motorhome, a house got sold. And when the new house got bought, guess whose name it went into? Just my stepmother's, not the trust. Her argument is, oh, your dad wanted to do that for me and he signed for it. Trust me, I've known my dad my whole life. The guy that was in that bed at the end, scribbling barely legitimate signatures on paperwork, was not my father anymore. He was gone. That was a brain injured guy, and he wasn't coherent. Now, the issue with that is too, and here's another bit of advice that I got to tell you. Beware narcotics when you get into rehab centers. These places will pump your family member full of opiates. They pump them full of it to keep them under control, keep them quiet, and keep them out of pain. My father, by the end of his life, I hate to say this, but it's true, my father was an absolute opiate junkie. If he wasn't on heavy, heavy medication, he would sit there and just say, I'm in pain, 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 just like that over and over. And it was gut-wrenching. It was hard to watch. So watch the medications that go in there. Now, I know you guys are probably thinking, you're like, man, that's a terrible story, but man, you just get a lawsuit and get it done. Guys, it does not work that way. The money that was stolen from, not even from me, not even from my sisters, but from our children. My dad was always so proud that he was left this nest egg for the grandkids. The fact that money's gone, I know he's up just spinning on this, which is just dreadful. But the reality of it is, it all could have been avoided. All of this stuff could have been avoided. I mean, had he gone to a decent hospital in the first place, in a real place, maybe they don't drop him on his head. Had he gone to a decent surgical center or decent rehab center, maybe he doesn't get a bed sore. If we weren't dealing with local doctors with God complexes, maybe he doesn't almost get his surgeries blocked, which happened. If we were watching the money better, maybe it doesn't get stolen. And now we're in a situation where at the end of this, you can't even sue because it's the three greedy kids against the poor old widow. And it just doesn't make any sense. So guys, to sum up, nobody likes to talk about death, but you got to talk to your parents about it. Find out exactly what they want, what their wishes are, how they want things done before they get sick. Because if it's a brain injury, guys, they're going to say all kinds of stuff. My dad thought he got in a plane crash. He didn't remember any of the other stuff. He thought he got in a plane crash. That's what he would tell everybody. This is a guy that's changing his lifelong will and his lifelong trust was a guy that thought he got in a plane crash. You got to have those conversations ahead of time. Very, very important. 2, make sure you get them the best, biggest medical help you can get them. Number 3, anything financial that happens, make sure you have an attorney or somebody else review it. Somebody's got to be watching the money because I promise you, it's a good way to lose it. And lastly, you've just got to make sure that these things happen, because if you don't, there's really no repercussion. We could sue all day and we probably win a lawsuit. I think we actually are in a lawsuit right now. We probably are going to win it. But the reality of it is, for what? I think the money's been stolen. I think it's gone. So my father spent his last days wondering, it was terrible, and I don't want to see anybody go through that. So be smart, have these tough conversations. We're all dying. It's going to happen to everybody. Protect those assets. Protect yourself. Protect the wishes of your parents. All right. Well, that's all I got for today. I hope that helps. I know this was a lot of heavy stuff. But yeah, just try to make good choices.